Tony, nobody is good enough for me, Grossi. No more of it. They're tired of after a man, again, who gave his money, paid for a private jet, who, by the way, kept his promise that he told the media.
A quarterback just banned a reporter, not the team, not the league, him, personally. And before you assume this is just another athlete throwing a tantrum over a bad take, you need to hear the full story, because what is buried underneath this media beef is something that happened exactly 1 year ago in a Cleveland neighborhood that most of those same reporters completely ignored. A real explosion, real families losing everything, a real man who lost his life trying to help others, and a young quarterback who showed up for that community without a camera crew, without a press release, without anybody asking him to. Then he ran a free football camp for kids who never get access to anything like it. And the response from a chunk of Cleveland media was to look for an angle to make it a problem. So Shedeur Sanders made a list, and he read it out loud. Tony Grossi, Tony Rizzo, Mary Kay Cabot. Done. No more access, no more attention, no more energy. Drop a word in the comments right now, accountable or overreacting, because where you land on this tells me everything. Stay locked in, because this story goes places most channels are not touching.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
I will not allow 92.3 and or ESPN Cleveland to, I don't even want y'all to hear it on the airwave. I have some alternative media that we're gonna watch, some of my favorite media members, and we're gonna stick to them. No more Mary Kay Cabot, no more Tony hangover glasses, domestic dispute Rizzo, no more Tony nobody is good enough for me, Grossi, no more of.
Here is where everything actually started, and it is not where most people think it did. Shedeur had been off the grid for a stretch, away from social media, away from the noise, doing his thing. When he came back online, one of the first things waiting for him was Rex Ryan taking a shot at him over a free football camp he had just thrown for kids in Cleveland. And I need you to sit with how genuinely backwards that is for a second. A young quarterback flies to Cleveland on his own dime, runs a completely free camp for kids in a community that is not even his hometown, and the reaction from a former NFL head coach turned television personality is to hunt for a reason to clown it. No congratulations, no acknowledgement of what actually happened on the ground, just an angle. Find the angle, any angle, and turn it into content. According to Shedeur himself, that was the moment something shifted in him. Not a rage tweet, not a back and forth in the replies, not a diss aimed at Rex specifically, a decision, a real calculated public decision about which voices were going to get his time and his platform going forward and which ones were not. And then he named them, plainly. No performance around it, no dramatic pause, just the names. Mary Kay Cabot, Tony Rizzo. And then Tony Grossi, who he referenced by that nickname that has followed Grossi around for years, the one that basically translates to nobody is ever quite good enough for this guy. You can hear in the way Shedeur delivers it that he is not doing this for heat or attention. He lands on it matter-of-factly, like a man who has already made his peace with the decision before he even said it out loud. Now, a huge part of what triggered all of this beyond the Rex Ryan moment was the private jet story. And I think this detail is getting buried under the flashier headline of a player banning reporters. Here is what actually happened. Shedeur had told Cleveland media last offseason directly that he and Deshaun Watson were working out together, building a real quarterback relationship, putting in the reps as teammates off the field. When it came time to get from Miami back to Cleveland quickly enough to honor that commitment and make sure he showed up for his team, he spent his own money on a private jet to make the timeline work. That is it. That is the whole story. A player keeping a promise to a teammate and to his organization on his own dime because the schedule demanded it. Nobody ran that detail in a headline. The headline that moved was private jet, which carries a completely different energy when you strip the context out of it entirely. And that right, There is exactly the kind of framing Shedeur is talking about when he describes the pattern he has been watching for over a year. It is not that he thinks players should be immune from criticism, or that showing up for a community erases every legitimate football question a reporter might have. He has said clearly that on-the-field stuff is completely fair game. What he is describing is something more specific than that. It is the way a genuinely positive story, a player spending his own money to keep a promise to a teammate, gets filed under flex or diva behavior the moment certain outlets get their hands on it. No context, no clarification, no follow-up on what the real reason was. Just the angle that generates the most friction. And that pattern, as he tells it, did not start with the Jet. It goes back a full year. And what happened a year ago is the part of this story that changes everything. Before we get to the heavier part of this story, I want to make sure we actually sit with what the camp itself represents, because I think it is getting treated like a footnote when it is genuinely one of the most important pieces of context in this whole situation. This was not a one-time publicity event. This was not Shedeur showing up for 45 minutes, shaking some hands, letting a camera crew get the shot, and then heading to dinner. This is year 2. He ran this same free camp last year in Cleveland. 500 kids came through completely free of charge in a community that does not typically get access to elite football instruction or anything close to it. And then he came back, same city, same commitment, same energy. No obligation, no requirement, nothing forcing a young quarterback to do any of this. He chose to, twice. Let that actually land for a second, because I think we gloss over it too fast when we are focused on the media beef portion of this story. Shedeur Sanders came into this league as a 5th-round pick. He was not handed the keys on draft night. He was not treated like a guaranteed franchise cornerstone from the moment his name got called. He came in with something to prove on the field, carrying more outside noise and more scrutiny around his draft position than most young quarterbacks deal with. And in the middle of all of that, he is flying to Cleveland on his own money to give kids a free football camp for the 2nd straight year in a city that is not even his hometown. Think about how rare that actually is. Think about how many players at his draft position, with his level of outside pressure, would make that choice. Think about how many players with his platform would keep making that choice after the first year without anybody forcing them to do it again. This is not brand building in the way that phrase usually gets used as a criticism. This is a young man deciding that this community matters to him, and then backing that up with his own time and his own money, consistently, quietly, without waiting for a thank you from anybody. And according to Shedeur, the reaction from a specific chunk of Cleveland media was Tony Grossi suggesting he needs to stop doing so much marketing outside of football, and Mary Kay Cabot characterizing his presence during OTAs as coming on too strong. Now, I want to be fair here, because I always try to give you the full picture, and not just the most inflammatory version of events. What is confirmed is that Shedeur named these people publicly and described their criticism in those terms.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
The exact phrasing and full context of what Grossi and Cabot said in their original coverage, I would encourage you to look at independently so you can form your own read on whether his characterization matches the source. That is always worth doing when one person is describing what someone else said. What I can tell you is that the broader pattern he is describing, where a positive community story gets filtered through a lens of what is wrong with this, or what is he really doing this for, is something multiple independent Cleveland voices have echoed separately. It is not just Shedeur's personal read on 3 specific people. It is a pattern that people who are actually on the ground in Cleveland covering this community have pointed to without him even prompting them. And that makes the next part of this story hit significantly harder than it would if it were just one player's isolated frustration. When Shedeur Sanders sat down and actually named the Cleveland media members he is done engaging with, that was not a snap decision made in the heat of a moment. The way he delivers it makes that clear. There is no elevated emotion in his voice, no point where it sounds like he is venting in real time and will walk it back tomorrow. He sounds like someone who has been turning this over in his head for a while and finally decided the moment was right to say it plainly. Mary Kay Cabot first. Cabot is one of the most well-known Cleveland Browns beat reporters in the market, someone who has covered this franchise for a long time and has a significant platform through a major outlet. According to Shedeur, her criticism of him coming on too strong during OTAs was the kind of framing that takes something a competitive young quarterback is supposed to do: show up with energy, show up with presence, show up like he belongs, and reframes it as a personality problem rather than a competitive quality. Tony Rizzo next. Rizzo is a prominent Cleveland radio voice, the kind of personality that has a broad daily audience and significant influence over how casual fans in that market perceive players day to day. According to Shedeur, Rizzo's suggestion that he needed to cut back on the marketing and focus on football landed as exactly the kind of criticism that ignores what is actually happening. Because if you know what Shedeur has been doing in that community, the camps, the charity work, the showing up during a real crisis, calling it marketing feels like the most reductive possible way to describe it. And then Tony Grossi. Grossi is a veteran Cleveland media figure who has been covering this franchise for decades and carries a specific reputation in that market, one that Shedeur referenced directly with that nickname. The nickname essentially translates to a critic who is always looking for the flaw, always skeptical, never quite satisfied with anything this organization does. When Shedeur lands on Grossi's name in that moment, he does it without a lot of extra language around it. He just says it and moves on, which honestly communicates more than a long explanation would. These are not three names he picked randomly or because they had one bad week covering him. These are three names he connects to a sustained pattern across a full year of coverage where, in his account, the lighter story always got the loudest treatment, and the heavier, more important community story got ignored. Now here is what I think is genuinely important to add to this. Shedeur was not saying these people cannot cover him. He was not saying the Browns should pull their credentials or that they have no right to write about him. He is making a personal decision about which voices he gives his time and his attention to going forward. He is saying independent creators who actually show up for the community, people who were out there on the ground during the real crisis, people who covered the camp without needing to find a catch. Those are the voices that earn his engagement from here on out. That is a fundamentally different thing than trying to control his media coverage or silence critics. That is a player using the one piece of leverage any public figure actually has, his own attention, and choosing where to direct it deliberately. And the reason he is directing it away from those three names specifically connects directly to something that happened in a Cleveland neighborhood about a year before that camp. And this is the part that most channels covering this story are not going into. June 23rd, a neighborhood in Cleveland called Garden Valley, an explosion and fire that most people outside of Ohio never heard about, and according to Shedeur, most major Cleveland outlets did not push nearly hard enough even within Ohio. This was not a minor incident. More than 40 families were displaced. Multiple people ended up hospitalized. And a man who has been remembered by people in that community as a hero, someone who put himself in danger trying to help others during the chaos, lost his life. These were working families. These were kids. These were people who woke up that morning with a home and went asleep that night with nothing. And according to Shedeur's account of events, residents in that area had reportedly flagged a gas leak before the explosion happened and were told there was nothing to be concerned about. Now I want to be precise with you here because this matters. That specific detail about residents reporting the leak beforehand and being dismissed is Shedeur's account. It is not something I can independently verify for you from a single confirmed source, and I think it is important you know that distinction rather than me presenting it to you as established fact. What I can tell you is that Shedeur was in that community after the explosion, not because a PR team told him to go. Not because there was a camera crew lined up waiting. He showed up. And an independent Cleveland creator who he specifically credited as someone who actually does real work covering this city was there documenting what was happening on the ground, the families displaced, the damage, the real human cost of what occurred in that neighborhood. Real coverage, on the ground, from people who actually went there.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
And here is the part that Shedeur said stung the most. And honestly, once you hear it, it is hard to unhear it. The major Cleveland stations, the same ones that cover his every practice rep, every outfit, every press conference comment, the same voices that had something to say about his camp, about his jet, about his energy during OTAs. Those stations, according to Shedeur, did not push out a donation link, did not run a sustained segment about the families who lost their homes, did not spend the kind of time and platform on a real community crisis that they regularly spend on lighter storylines involving him specifically. Now, I want to give you the same caveat here that I gave you on the gas leak detail. What Shedeur is describing about the major station's response to Garden Valley is his characterization of their coverage, or lack of it. Whether the specific outlets he has in mind ran any coverage of this event at all is something worth looking into independently, rather than taking any single account as the complete picture. What I can tell you is that multiple independent Cleveland voices have backed up the broader point that this tragedy did not get the kind of sustained major platform coverage that its scale warranted. And when you stack that up against the daily volume of coverage those same platforms produce about a quarterback's press conference comments, the contrast becomes genuinely difficult to explain away. This is the foundation of what Shedeur is actually pointing to. Not one bad take about a camp. Not one skeptical column about his fit in this offense. An entire year of watching a serious community tragedy get less energy from the loudest local voices than his outfit choices did. And then those same voices piling on the moment he did something genuinely positive for that same community. That is the full picture. And once you see it that way, the names on his list start to look a lot less like impulsive callouts and a lot more like a conclusion he spent 12 months arriving at. One of the things that makes Shedeur's account harder to dismiss than a typical athlete media grievance is that he did not stand up there alone when he said it. The independent Cleveland creator he credited specifically, who goes by Chef Z, backed up the broader pattern in real time and did it without Shedeur prompting him to. Chef Z spoke to the fact that Shedeur has been consistently doing this kind of community work since arriving in Cleveland. The camp, a charity event connected to the Garden Valley situation that barely got picked up by major outlets until after the fact. Giveaways, and according to Chef Z, even car giveaways. None of it pushed by the big stations. None of it earning a thank you segment on air. None of it getting the kind of sustained follow-up coverage that would have told those communities that somebody with a major platform actually noticed what Shedeur was doing for them. When Shedeur heard that confirmation from someone who is actually embedded in Cleveland, actually covering the community from the inside rather than from a studio, his reaction was telling. He described it as relief, like he had been noticing this pattern for a year and was not entirely sure if he was reading it correctly. And then someone who had no reason to just tell him what he wanted to hear confirmed that he was seeing the same thing they were. That is a meaningfully different reaction than someone looking for validation. That is someone who genuinely wanted to know if the pattern was real before he said anything about it publicly. And now let's talk about the retweet, because I think this piece is being underplayed in most of the coverage I have seen. Shedeur Sanders amplified this situation. His own father, a Hall of Fame player, a man who has spent decades operating at the highest level of professional sports and sports media, looked at what his son was pointing to and felt strongly enough about it to put his own platform behind it. Think about what Shedeur has seen across his career in terms of media coverage. He played in an era before social media. He dealt with every version of sports journalism, the beat reporter, the television analyst, the radio personality, the columnist. He has been covered closely and critically by every type of outlet that exists in this business. For a man with that depth of experience to look at this situation and say, yes, I am putting my name on this, that is not a small endorsement. That is someone who has seen enough of the real thing to recognize it when his son is describing it accurately. And it adds a generational layer to this that I think is genuinely worth sitting with. This is not just Shedeur's personal frustration as a young player still figuring out the NFL. This is a family that has watched the relationship between athletes and media long enough to identify when something real and structural is being pointed out versus when a player is just being sensitive about a bad week of coverage. The independent creator angle is also worth spending a moment on beyond just Chef Z specifically, because this is the part of the media landscape shift that I think is most significant long-term. Shedeur is not just saying he is done with 3 names. He is actively saying he is redirecting his platform and his access toward independent voices, people who show up on the ground, people who were there when it mattered, people who cover the community without needing a controversy to justify it. That is a real statement about where he sees trustworthy journalism coming from in this moment. And it is one more data point in a pattern that is showing up across the league. What Shedeur did by naming names publicly and explicitly redirecting his attention toward independent creators is not happening in a vacuum. It is one of the most visible recent examples of something that has been building across the NFL, and honestly across professional sports broadly for several years now. Players are increasingly choosing to bypass traditional media entirely and go directly to the people who they feel actually do the work. And the speed and clarity with which Shedeur did it, naming specific people, explaining the reasoning publicly, tying it to a documented community situation, makes this one of the more significant moments in that ongoing shift. Think about what the landscape looked like even 10 years ago. A player who had a problem with how a specific reporter was covering him had almost no real options. You could dodge questions at a press conference.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
You could give short, clipped answers and hope the reporter moved on. You could complain to a PR team and hope the team applied some behind-the-scenes pressure. But you could not go directly to millions of people, explain your reasoning in full sentences with full context, and redirect your platform to the voices you actually trusted, all without a single intermediary filtering your words down to a 15-second sound bite. That leverage has completely shifted. A player with a phone and a platform can now control the narrative in ways that were genuinely impossible for previous generations of athletes. And what Shedeur did was use that leverage deliberately, not emotionally. He did not hop on a live stream in the middle of a frustrating moment and say something he would have to walk back the next morning. He came to this with a year of context behind it, a specific documented situation he could point to, independent voices he could name who had backed up his read on the pattern, and a clear alternative he was offering to the media members he was cutting off. That is not impulsive. That is strategic. And I think other players across the league are watching. Because when you look at the players who have built the strongest direct connections with their fan bases in recent years, the ones who have the most loyal audiences who follow them beyond just their team affiliation, those are increasingly the players who have gone direct, who have elevated independent creators, who have stopped treating the traditional press conference as the primary venue for their voice, and started using their own channels to tell their own story. Shedeur is 23 years old. He is a 5th-round pick fighting for a starting job, and he is already operating with a level of media awareness that most veterans twice his age do not demonstrate. He knows exactly which voices have been fair, exactly which ones have looked for the negative angle even when the story was positive, and exactly what he is willing to offer each category going forward. That kind of clarity is rare. And I think the fact that it is coming from someone so early in his career makes it more significant, not less. Because this is not a veteran with 10 years of goodwill in the bank making a calculated power move from a position of total security. This is a young quarterback with something to prove, carrying real external pressure, choosing to make a principled public stand anyway, because he believes the pattern he is pointing to is real and worth naming. Whether you agree with every name on his list or not, that combination of awareness and willingness to act on it publicly is something this league has not seen from many players at this stage. And heading into training camp, the question everybody in Cleveland is going to be watching is whether that chip sharpens him, or whether managing this dynamic adds one more complication to an already complicated situation. Here is the reality of what Shedeur Sanders is walking into right now, and why the timing of all of this makes it genuinely complicated beyond just the media angle. He is heading into a training camp where the starting quarterback job is not locked up. He is in a competition. Every rep is being watched. Every decision under pressure is being evaluated. And the entire Cleveland fan base, along with the national football media, is using this camp to form their first real opinions about whether this is a quarterback who can lead this franchise or a project who needs more time. That is the football situation he is navigating. And now layered directly on top of that is a media dynamic where three of the reporters who cover this team most closely have been publicly called out by him by name in front of a large audience. Every press availability from here on out carries a different energy than it would have 2 weeks ago. Reporters who were not named are going to be watching carefully to see how he treats them versus how he treats the ones he called out. Fans are going to be scrutinizing every question asked in every press conference, looking for signs of tension or bias. And Grossi, Rizzo, and Cabot are going to be in a position where every single thing they write or say about him gets filtered through this moment by a significant portion of the audience consuming their work. That is a genuinely awkward ecosystem for a training camp to operate in, and it is one more variable Shedeur has to manage on top of the actual football competition that determines his immediate future with this team. Now, the Cleveland fan base reaction to all of this has been genuinely split along some interesting lines, and I think the split itself tells you something worth paying attention to. You have a group of longtime Browns fans who have watched this specific beat cover this franchise through years of quarterback chaos and organizational dysfunction, and a lot of them have carried their own frustrations about how certain stories got covered, and which community issues got buried long before Shedeur ever arrived in Cleveland. For those fans, this moment felt like validation, like a player finally said publicly what a portion of the fan base had been thinking quietly for years. And then you have another group, fans who think that regardless of any of that context, a player who has not yet played a full regular season game as a starter drawing hard public lines with veteran media at this stage of his career is a risky approach. That the cleaner play is to let your football speak for itself, absorb the criticism you do not agree with, and let your performance over time change the narrative without adding a media feud to the pile. Both of those reactions make sense depending on where you were already standing when this story broke. And I think the honest answer is that they are both pointing at something real. Media scrutiny is part of the job at this level. Full stop. There is no version of being a starting quarterback in a major NFL market where you get to opt out of critical coverage or filter your press obligations based on which reporters you trust. That is just the reality of the role. But there is also a real difference between fair critical football coverage and what Shedeur is describing, which is a pattern of silence on serious community issues paired with constant noise on every surface-level storyline involving him. Those are not the same thing, and the fact that multiple independent voices have backed up his read on that pattern without him prompting them makes it very difficult to reduce this to a young player being sensitive about bad press. Here is where all of this lands. A young quarterback spent a full year showing up for a community that did not ask him to, running free camps, appearing during a real tragedy, doing the work quietly without waiting for coverage or credit. He watched a serious neighborhood crisis get less sustained attention from major local platforms than his press conference outfits did. And when those same platforms found an angle to criticize the camp, he made a decision. No more. The names went public. The line got drawn. And now every single thing that happens between Shedeur Sanders and Cleveland media from here on out gets filtered through this moment. That is the real headline buried under the private jet and the camp in the callow. A player using the only leverage he actually has, his attention and his platform, to redirect toward voices that showed up when it mattered. Whether that sharpens him heading into camp or becomes one more distraction is the question Cleveland is watching right now. And here at Gridiron Ground, we are not giving you the headline. We are giving you the whole story, every layer, every angle, every time. If that is the kind of coverage you want, you already know what to do. We will see you in the next one.
I will not allow 92.3 and or ESPN Cleveland to, I don't even want y'all to hear it on the airwave. I have some alternative media that we're gonna watch, some of my favorite media members, and we're gonna stick to them. No more Mary Kay Cabot, no more Tony hangover glasses, domestic dispute Rizzo, no more Tony nobody is good enough for me Grossi, no more of